We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under this weak Albanese Labor government, interest rates have increased 12 times, energy bills have risen by $1,000, living standards have collapsed, 27,000 businesses have gone insolvent, and we're in a record-breaking household recession. Will the Prime Minister now apologise for promising Australians they would be better off and admit that they can't afford another 3 years of this weak Albanese Labor government?
Give the call. Order. Members on my right will cease interjection immediately. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, when we came to office, real incomes were going backwards, inflation was going up, rising, had a 6 in front of it, and indeed we had people's living standards going backwards. And we had deficits, a $78 billion deficit that we inherited in the March 2022 budget. But let's go through the figures of then and now that is raised by the Leader of the Opposition. Inflation in that March 2022 quarter was 2.1%. In the quarter that has just passed, headline was 0.2 and underlying was 0.5. Inflation was 2.4 on an annual basis, under the 2 to 3 range that the RBA aimed for, in the bottom half of that range. That was achieved without seeing the massive spike in unemployment that we have seen in comparable economies. Unemployment is 4%, up from 3.9 to 4 on the latest figures. So what we have seen also is that wages have increased 4 quarters in a row. So inflation up, wages down, unemployment low. That is what has been achieved through the hard work of Australians. We also have received during that period 2, not 1 but 2, budget surpluses, back-to-back surpluses. Now, those opposite didn't worry about inflation. At a time where you had that inflation rising, interest rates had begun to rise. What was their response to the March 2022 budget? That produced a $78 billion predicted deficit and deficits each year all the way through. His debut.
Order. Order. Members on my right. The manager. Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? The manager is entitled to raise a point of order, and he shall do so now.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister was asked a question about his promise to make Australians better off. That cannot stray into opposition policy or the previous government by definition, because it's from the date of your promise to now and whether Australians are better off.
Order. The Treasurer and the Minister for Housing. Just because someone makes a point of order is not the cue to give a running commentary. The manager is entitled to raise a point of order, and he's done so. And I'll hear from the Leader of the House on the point of order.
Yeah, Mr Speaker, I'm not sure if he actually said what the point of order was on, but if he was referring to direct relevance, you look at the terms of that question, and the Prime Minister is clearly relevant to it.
I read the room that the member for Deakin was raising on a point of relevance. The question was also phrased around admitting families being better off now than they were. So if the Prime Minister is being directly relevant about figures and numbers, particularly about what he was asked about, he is being directly relevant, but he's got 30 seconds to make sure he remains directly relevant.
I'm asked to compare and contrast, and that's what I'm doing, Mr Speaker, and I'll make this point as well. If they had their way, there wouldn't be cheaper medicines. If they had their way, it wouldn't be cheaper childcare. If they had their way, there wouldn't have been any rebates on energy bills. If they had their way, there wouldn't be tax cuts for every taxpayer. And we now know that they've come up with a cost of living plan, but it's just not for workers. It's that workers should pay for some of their mates to have lunch.
Order. The Prime Minister's time has concluded. We'll hear from the member for Newcastle.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's responsible economic management helping in the fight against inflation? And are there any approaches that would leave people worse off?
Great.
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Newcastle for her wonderful work and for her question. Australians together made very welcome and encouraging progress in the fight against inflation, and we saw that in the numbers last week, which were better than expected and better than forecast. Headline inflation is 2.4% in the bottom of the half of the Reserve Bank's range. Underlying inflation came down as well. It's now in the low threes on both fronts. That is the lowest we've seen for some years. Now, there's more to do, Mr Speaker. We know that because people are still under pressure. But the progress that we have delivered has been substantial and it has been sustained. As the Prime Minister rightly pointed out, when we came to office, inflation was much higher and rising, real wages were falling and there was a mountain of Liberal debt. And under this Prime Minister, inflation is down, wages are up, unemployment is low. We've delivered 2 budget surpluses, we've got the debt down and we've rolled out cost of living relief at the same time. And that's what it means to manage the economy in a responsible and methodical way. Now, I'm asked about alternatives, Mr Speaker, but it's been almost 3 years now, and those opposite are yet to come up with any costed, coherent or credible policies on the economy. All we've got from them is lower wages for workers and longer lunches for bosses, with the taxpayers to foot the bill, Mr Speaker. He wants workers to pay for bosses' lunches, and he will smash the budget in the process. Now, this is the only kind of policy that could have been agreed at the tail end of a very long lunch, Mr Speaker. You can imagine them sitting around with the blue teeth and the soy sauce on the tie, coming up with the big ideas, Mr Speaker, and either they didn't know how much it cost when they announced the policy or they didn't want Australians to know. They have refused to come clean on the cost of their long lunch policy or what they will cut to pay for that policy. And there's a pattern here. On Sunday, the Leader of the Opposition was asked about whether there'd be cuts in the budget. He said there would be, but he wouldn't tell the Australian people until after the election. Now, this is the very real risk posed by this Leader of the Opposition. If he had his way on tax cuts and wages and energy bills, Australians would already be thousands of dollars worse off, and they'd be worse off still if he wins. And that's what makes this decision that Australians will make this year a very important decision and a very stark choice between an opposition focused on cuts and conflict and culture wars who would make people worse off and take Australia backwards, or a Prime Minister and a Labor government helping with the cost of living, making progress on inflation, managing the economy responsibly and building Australia's future.
Call to the Shadow Treasurer.
My question is to the Treasurer. Treasurer, unlike small businesses, big businesses like Coles and Woolworths and Qantas can cater in-house in their corporate boardrooms and do so as a tax deduction. How much does this cost the budget?
No. Groundhog Day. We're going to reset. I'm dealing with it. I'm resetting the rules yet again. Members on my right, I think it's pretty clear my position after these years. Questions are going to be heard in silence. You mightn't like the content. I'm sure the opposition doesn't like some of the answers either. But we are going. The Leader of the Opposition is going to cease interjecting because so out of courtesy for the Shadow Treasurer, he'll begin his question again. And it's really simple for members on my right. If you interject, you won't hear the question. The Shadow Treasurer. Order. The Shadow Treasurer has the call.
Treasurer, unlike small businesses, big businesses like Coles and Woolworths and Qantas can cater in-house in their corporate boardrooms and do so as a tax deduction. How much does this cost the budget?
Oh, I forgot about.
Order. The member for Hume, we've asked the question. Order. The member for Cooper will leave the chamber under 94A. We're not having interjections before someone begins their answer. Completely disrespectful. The Treasurer has the call.
Oh, Mr Speaker, I was sitting there hoping that they'd double down on this policy, and it turns out that they have, and I couldn't be happier about that, Mr Speaker, if I'm honest with you. Now, Mr Speaker, 2 points about the Shadow Treasurer's question. First of all, only the Liberal and National parties could see taxpayers and workers funding between $1.6 billion and $10 billion to shout their boss's lunch as an issue of fairness. Only those opposite could see that as an issue of social justice, Mr Speaker, and an issue of fairness. The second point I would make is this, Mr Speaker. The nerve of these characters, on a day when they've been sprung not releasing the cost of their own policy, jumping up and asking about the costing on a policy which has been long-standing, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, the reason that the Shadow Treasurer is losing his cool again, just like he did when the good inflation numbers came out, is because—
Order. Members on my right. The manager on the point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's on relevance. The Treasurer was asked for a number. Has he had it costed? If he doesn't, he should sit down.
Order. Leader of the House on the point of order.
Mr Speaker, the question went to the capacity of a business to claim on lunches. That's the concept that the question went to, and that's exactly what the Treasurer is referring to. Yeah. A question can't demand that it can only be answered in a particular way. A question simply has to be, the minister has to be relevant to it.
The question was a tight question. It was about a number, and I appreciate the Shadow Treasurer would like an exact figure, would perhaps like a direct answer. Order. Order. The Leader of the Opposition yelling at me is not helping this situation. I can't make, under the standing orders, the Treasurer give the figure that you would like. What I can do is make sure he is being directly relevant, so that is not straying into opposition policy, that is not moving into alternative approaches, because he wasn't asked about those. But I'll order. So I'll hear from the manager.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And just for the avoidance of doubt, we don't necessarily demand a number, as you suggest, but what we do ask is that the Treasurer is directly relevant to whether he has had it costed.
Yeah. Order. The manager is entitled to state of, and the Leader is entitled to respond to it if he wishes. Okay. So we're all in agreement, which is good. Thank you, Manager. We're just going to have to make sure the Treasurer is directly relevant to the question he was asked about, which means he can comment about aspects of the question, and if he wishes to give the number, perhaps he shall do so. He has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The only party in this parliament proposing to change the arrangements for tax breaks for long lunches is the opposition. And that's why it is the costing before the parliament today. And the reason that we have highlighted, Mr Speaker, the costings that those opposite fail to provide is because when they don't come clean on the costs, it means they won't come clean on the cuts. That is the point I'm making, Mr Speaker. Now, we have chosen to support small businesses in a much more responsible way, and the way that we're—
The Treasurer will resume his seat, so the Leader of the Opposition will be— Order. The Minister will cease rejecting. The Leader of the Opposition on a further point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. You gave a very definite direction to the Treasurer. It was a tight question. He was asking about the existing policy, what the cost of the budget is of that policy, which allows Qantas to have a boardroom lunch worth thousands of dollars, and for that lunch to be deductible, a lunch that the Prime Minister or the Treasurer could attend or perhaps have in the past.
Resume your seat. The Leader of the Opposition is now abusing standing orders. It is not another opportunity under the standing orders to simply get up and make a statement. He knows that. Nice try, but he won't be doing that anymore during question time. Equally so, the Treasurer, if he's not going to be directly relevant, he cannot talk about opposition policy. He needs to refer to the question he was asked. Otherwise, I shall sit him down. So the Treasurer, in continuation, for 1 minute 25.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The reason that number is not in the budget is because we're not changing the arrangements. That's the point that I'm making. The only change that's being proposed is the change being proposed by those opposite. Now, Mr Speaker, we are supporting small businesses in a more responsible way, with help with energy bills that they opposed, with an instant asset tax write-off that they tried to hold up in the Senate, with help for cyber security, and with competition policy and in other ways. Now, Mr Speaker, I know that they are terribly embarrassed today because they couldn't hand in their homework. They either didn't know or wouldn't say how much their policy costs. We've done their homework for them. The policy that they are trying to inflict on the Australian people would have workers shout lunches for their bosses and would smash a $10 billion hole up to in the budget as a consequence.
The call to the honourable member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What work is the Labor government doing to address the challenges of today while working to continue to build for the future? Are there any alternative approaches that would leave Australians worse off?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Bendigo for both elements of her question. And we do begin 2025 with new reasons for optimism about the road ahead. Inflation is going down, wages are going up, and unemployment is low. The world has thrown a lot of challenges at us, and we know that it has been difficult with financial pressure on households, and we know that many households are still under financial pressure, which is why there is more to do. But what we've done is manage the economy responsibly while providing cost of living relief. Tax cuts, cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare, energy bill relief, back-to-back budget surpluses. And these are the strong foundations that we've laid as we tackle those immediate challenges, but as we navigate these turbulent seas, we've always had our eye on the horizon as well. So we deliberately have designed a range of the measures so that they address cost of living pressures whilst creating the conditions for building Australia's future. Investing in free TAFE lowers costs for people, 600,000 of them, whilst giving them the skills that they need and employers the skilled workforce that they need going forward. Fully funding all of our schools that we aim to do. 6 out of 8 states signed up, making a difference as well. The childcare policy, including the 3 guarantee for childcare, is about building Australia's future. Wiping 20% of student debt, making sure that we strengthen Medicare through our 87 urgent care clinics after we promised 50 at the last election. Meanwhile, I'm asked about alternatives. Well, the Leader of the Opposition is out there talking about economic surgery. Now, on Insiders, just on Sunday, he confirmed that massive cuts are coming. But he won't tell Australians what they are until after the election. He wants you to vote for them, and then there'll be cuts coming after the election. He wants to put the whole country under the knife, but he won't tell you what he's cutting until after the operation. Well, we know that already, on top of their opposition of all of our cost of living measures, the only policy that they have put forward, the only policy they've come up with, is for every taxpayer to fund a free lunch that those opposite have now doubled down on today. Doubled down on.
Order.
So we're thinking outside the box, they're thinking inside the lunchbox. That is their policy as they go forward. Now we will continue to provide cost of living relief while continuing to strengthen the economy. Those opposite.
The call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. 1 in 3 big corporations in this country pays no tax, $0 tax. But meanwhile, people can't afford basics like going to the dentist. Why does a nurse from Coburg North pay more tax than a multinational corporation? Why won't you make big corporations pay tax to get dental into Medicare so that in this wealthy country of ours, everyone can get the health care they need?
Yeah.
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Melbourne for his question. That goes to tax policy but also goes to health policy as well. And on tax policy, in spite of his general observation, the truth is that many big companies do pay considerable amounts of tax and revenue that is then used to fund health and education. But one of the things that we did around about this time last year, and the member for Melbourne will recall those opposite saying that they would oppose it, absolutely, and then they would roll it back before they said that we should call an election at this time last year, even though actually the Constitution doesn't allow that to happen. But we won't worry about that. They said we should call an election. They were so hostile to nurses and other workers benefiting. Now, what we did was we took the tax cuts that were primarily aimed at the top end and we redistributed those to people on low incomes, but targeted particularly Middle Australia, because we understood that they were under financial pressure. So we delivered the change through this parliament, and those opposite don't talk about that anymore. They said they would reverse it. They said they would reverse it and reinstate those tax cuts for the high end, and we await a policy at some stage, apart from their free lunch policy, and we await the costings of them apart from their nuclear policy. But I'm asked also about health care, and we understand that provision of health care and universal health care is so important. That is why we tripled the bulk billing incentive. That is why we've opened 87 urgent care clinics. That is why we're concentrating on what our system is, which is primarily responsible for primary health care, because we understand that that's the way as well that you take pressure off emergency departments and enable people to get the health care that they need. And that stands in stark contrast to the record of the Leader of the Opposition, who of course wanted a GP tax every time people visited a doctor, wanted a tax every time people visit a hospital, ripped $50 billion out of the hospital system. We on this side of the House will always look to do more when it comes to health care. We will look at sensible ways of being able to move forward, because we understand how important that is. And it's one of the great divides in Australian politics. On the weekend we celebrated the 41st birthday of Medicare, proudly created by Labor, always strengthened by Labor.
I call the member for Hawke. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are musicians from the Australian National Academy of Music, who've been performing at Parliament House today, and also Christopher, Caitlin and Tia, who are here today representing the Employment Youth Advisory Group. Welcome to you all. Give a call to the honourable member for Hawke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to cut student debt? What has been the response to these reforms? Are there approaches that would leave students worse off?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend the hirsute member for Hawke for his question. Mr Speaker, if you want a good example of the difference between Labor and Liberal, then this is it. We're cutting HECS debt for 3 million Australians, and they want to cut the cost of lunch for bosses. That's it in a nutshell. We've already cut HECS debt by more than $3 billion for 3 million Australians. We passed those laws late last year, and over Christmas the ATO made this change, cutting the debt of 3 million Australians. But there's more to do, and there's more that we will do. If we win the next election, we will cut all student debts by a further 20%. That means that somebody with an average HECS debt today of $27,000 will see that debt cut by more than $5,000. And if they've got a HECS debt of $50,000, then that'll be cut by $10,000. That's a lot of help for a lot of young people just out of uni, just getting started. And what do you think the Liberals think of all of this? They're opposed to that.
No.
Surprise, surprise. They say that's a terrible idea. They think it's a terrible idea that we should cut the debt of Aussie workers and Aussie students. Well, I'll tell you what I think a terrible idea is: making these same students and workers pay for their boss's lunch. And I'll give you 1.6 billion reasons why, because that's how much it'll cost, $1.6 billion a year, at least.
Order. The Minister will resume his seat. The Minister for Industry will cease interjecting so I can hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The point of order is on relevance. It cannot be directly relevant to the question about education and HECS for the Minister to be engaging in this diatribe about the opposition.
I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. When the final part of the question says, are there approaches that would leave students worse off, I'm not sure how this is anything other than relevant. He's referring specifically to approaches that would leave students worse off.
I'll just deal with this. It's fine. I did hear the Minister refer to the figure regarding students and, I think, teachers paying for the policy, so that is being directly relevant. But he can't have the remainder of his answer simply about opposition policy, because he wasn't asked about opposition policy. He was asked for the whole question, so he's got to make it relevant. So as long as he's talking about the alternative approaches and making it relevant to his portfolio, he's being directly relevant. But I'll listen carefully to make sure he remains relevant.
Well, here's the point that makes this relevant, Mr Speaker. We want to cut student debt by 20%. They want students and Aussie workers to pay for their boss's lunch, and that's how that would make them worse off, to the tune of $1.6 billion a year. That's a lot of steak tartare. You know, that is a lot of lobster. And I think a lot of Australians, when they find out about this, a lot of Aussie students, a lot of Aussie workers will be pretty angry about it. But their hard-earned money has got to pay for all of this.
Member for Petrie.
And I'd say that over the next few months, as people go to cafes and restaurants, as they see someone pull out a credit card, that they've got to think to themselves, if the Liberals win the next election, then that could be them and their tax dollars having to pay for all of that. The choice at the next election, Mr Speaker, is very clear. We'll cut your debt. They want you to pay for your boss's lunch. Under the Labor Party, we'll cut your student debt by 20% to help you get started, help build Australia's future. Under the Liberal Party, they'll leave all Australians worse off, left to pick up the boss's bill.
Called. Order. We'll hear from the member for Hume.
My question is to the Treasurer. Treasurer, a large company can cater for a lunch with food and alcohol in its boardroom worth thousands of dollars and can claim that cost as a tax deduction. What is the cost of this tax policy to the budget?
Order. The member for Spence is warned. Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Their policy for lower wages for workers and longer lunches for bosses is a matter of fairness, but not the way that they think it is. Not the way that they think it is. And if the member for Hume wants to be the Treasurer of this country, he really should know that the numbers that he is asking for are not itemised in the budget, and that's because they are part of the tax base, and we're not proposing to change it. The only party in here proposing to make it easier for bosses to claim long lunches paid for by workers and taxpayers is those opposite, Mr Speaker. That is they are the only ones proposing to change these arrangements. And, Mr Speaker, I can hear him chirping away. He hasn't been this unhappy since inflation came in at the lower end of the RBA target.
The Treasurer will pause. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I seek your ruling in relation to relevance and whether the Treasurer is relevant to the tight question that he was asked. The fact is that for big businesses, they can in-house pay.
Resume your seat. Yeah, I understand the point. But it's not a time to give your comments about what you think he should be answering with. You've raised the point of order. You've discussed it on relevance. I understand that you're entitled to understanding orders. That no member can then just say, well, what I think it should be or what he should be doing. It doesn't work that way. On a point of order.
Well, on the point of order, as I say, Mr Speaker, I'm asking for your ruling in relation to whether the Treasurer is relevant to this very tight question. It goes to a measure which is in the budget. It's government policy for these big businesses to have tax deductions for lunches. How much does it cost Australian workers and taxpayers? It's a reasonable question, and it should be answered.
Order. The member for Hume. Order. We're going to hear. So I can see this is a point of concern. The Treasurer was asked, what is the figure, what is the cost? And the Leader of the Opposition is desperate to have that. Well, if you stop talking over me, I'll deal with your point of order. So the Treasurer has said, and I've listened carefully to his answer, it's not a costed figure because it's not in the budget, or that's his answer. So you've asked a question, what is the figure, what is the answer? He's answering that. And he's saying why it's not in the budget. So he is being directly relevant. So we're just going to make sure he's being directly relevant. And it is hard for me because I'd like him to give a figure. I'd like a yes-no answer. It made my job a lot easier. But that's not the standing orders. We've all got to operate together under the standing orders, to respect the standing orders. So I'm asking ministers to respect the standing orders, and I'm asking opposition members to respect the standing orders. The Treasurer, in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate that. I can understand why they don't want to talk about the costings of their own policy. From our point of view, we have not changed the policy. That's why there's not a costing of a new measure in the budget, and that's what makes the situation they're asking me about very different to the mess that the member for Hume has made of this costing. We tried to warn the opposition leader that if he put this bloke in charge of the costings, it would go bad, and it turns out it did.
The call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How are Medicare urgent care clinics making it easier for Australians to see a doctor after a decade of cuts and neglect? What proposals will make it harder to see a doctor and leave people worse off?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you to the member for Lyons, not just for his question but for terrific service over the last 9 years in this place. He remembers that at the last election we promised 50 urgent care clinics across Australia, and we've delivered 87 of them, open 7 days a week, extended hours for walk-in patients, Mr Speaker. Already they've seen more than 1.1 million patients, 1 in 3 of them kids under 15, 1 in 3 of them seen over the weekend, but every single one of them fully bulk billed, Mr Speaker. And the member for Lyons and the Tasmanian Government, must be said, argued strongly for a clinic to be opened in Bridgewater, north of Hobart, Mr Speaker, and I was delighted to visit that clinic with the Minister for Agriculture and the terrific Rebecca White in early December in its first couple of weeks of operation. And already it is making a real difference to that community, Mr Speaker. One member of that community, Hayley, said online, she said, "I took my son here for an injury in December. He was seen by the nurse and treated by the doctor within an hour of arriving. Certainly better than waiting in the Royal Hobart for 8 hours, Mr Speaker." And that's the point. That's the point. Not just delivering high-quality urgent care in the community, but also relieving pressure off local emergency departments. But while this is making a real difference, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister and I have both said that we do need to do more to keep strengthening Medicare after a decade of cuts and neglect. But we also know that all of this progress, like urgent care clinics, is under threat from the Leader of the Opposition, who has opposed all of our investments in Medicare. On Sunday, he quite openly said that if elected as Prime Minister, he would go about cutting services. He just would not fess up about which ones. Well, we know, Mr Speaker, that he'll go after Medicare, because that's exactly what he did when he last had the chance as Health Minister, when he famously said there were, in his opinion, too many free Medicare services. That must be why they describe free urgent care clinics as wasteful spending, Mr Speaker. Well, we can have no doubt. Under a Dutton-led government, the urgent care clinics will close, and hundreds of thousands of Australians like Hayley and her son and others will be forced back into waiting hours upon hours in crowded emergency departments. And for what, Mr Speaker? Not just because they've never really supported Medicare, but because this man favours long lunches on the taxpayer dime over free urgent care. This man has to find $600 billion for his nuclear power stations instead of investing in health. And that is why Australians are never going to trust this man with Medicare.
Call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, by what percentage has the cost of food increased since the election of the Albanese Labor government?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. And indeed, it goes to cost of living and it goes to inflation. And what we know is that inflation is now at 2.4%, less than in the bottom half of what the Reserve Bank range of 2 to 3% their target range is. And we know that when we were elected, it had a 6 in front of it. And, of course, the price of all goods and services feed into those inflationary figures, Mr Speaker. We know as well that the underlying rate is down to 3.2. And we know as well that the response of those opposite has been to never be more upset than when inflation was going down. Never be more upset. They went out there.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat for a moment, and the Deputy Leader will raise a point of order.
My point of order is on relevance, Mr Speaker, and the Prime Minister appears to be in some parallel universe. These figures are readily available. It's a question about the increase in the percentage rate by percentage rate of the cost of food since Labor was elected.
Order. The Minister for the Environment, the Leader of the Opposition, is just going to cease their helpful remarks. The Prime Minister was asked once again during question time for a specific figure, for a number, for a fact, a figure. If the Prime Minister wishes to release that figure or perhaps wants to talk about the topic regarding the impact on that figure, which inflation would be a relevant impact, he can't talk about other things that aren't relative to the question. It was a very short question. There's not a lot of scope for the Prime Minister to go wide range here, but so far, with talking about inflation and talking about the impact that that's having on the question, I think anyone would agree is directly relevant. So just ask the Prime Minister to continue to make sure he's directly relevant.
We understand that inflation has an impact on households. That's why we have acted. That's why we've acted to make sure that inflation is brought down. That's why, in addition, we've taken action against supermarkets, including the mandated code of conduct that we have brought in. That is why, across the board, we are taking action on cost of living. That is what our government has been focused on. And the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, along with the rest of her team, has opposed all of the cost of living measures that we have put in place. And in addition to that, one of the things that has helped to bring prices down and bring inflation down is the fact that we turned a $78 billion Liberal deficit into a $22 billion Labor surplus, and backed that up with a second surplus. So whether it's cost of living relief, whether it be action against supermarkets—
The Prime Minister, well, the Deputy Leader, I will, out of courtesy, give her the call.
Mr Speaker, I seek your ruling as to whether the Prime Minister is in order with his remarks, following your earlier directing him back to the question.
The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, two things. One, members can rise on a point of order. This concept of rising on a ruling is not anywhere in the standing orders. Secondly, when we're talking about food prices, I don't know in what universe action on supermarkets is not directly relevant to that.
There's only one point of order allowed. If you're not happy with the way I've handled a situation, any member can take action then. But to simply come back in the future and go, can you further clarify a minute later what your decision was, well, that's not practical and that's not common sense. And no speaker has had to deal with that before. So we're just going to make sure that the Prime Minister is being directly relevant. I was listening to, before he was interrupted, about supermarkets or impacts. So, yes, I can appreciate it's a short question and you want a number and you want a figure. As long as he's being directly relevant, we've got to make sure that everyone follows the standing orders. The Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. So we have had a multifaceted approach to this. We have sought to bring inflation down through a range of measures by ensuring that our cost of living support is also having a downward impact on inflation. In addition to that, we've had stronger action against supermarkets to make sure that instead of having a voluntary code of conduct where they all just sit around and voluntarily, which is what we inherited from those opposite, we've introduced a mandated code of conduct. And the third, which they voted against, I'm reminded. So we'll continue to take action to help Australians. Those opposite will continue to, and I'm reminded that the Deputy Leader of the Opposition was very strong in opposing tax cuts for low and middle income earners and said—
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. So I can hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Workplace Relations. What does recent evidence show about how the Albanese Labor government's wage increases are helping Australians with the cost of living? And what threatens these pay rises which would leave people worse off?
Call to the Leader of the House and the Minister representing the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Gilmore. Every worker in the electorate of Gilmore is earning more and keeping more of what they earn because the member for Gilmore is there. It's a year since the Prime Minister made clear that we wanted workers to earn more and keep more of what they earn. Those opposite are opposed to both ideas. But since that time, we have now had real wages growth for 4 quarters in a row. Wages are now going up, inflation is going down, and there are more jobs. The Leader of the Opposition confessed on the weekend that he'll make huge cuts but won't say what they'll be till after the election. We already knew about $350 billion in cuts, another $600 billion to pay for his nuclear scheme. But we now know as well as to where those cuts might come from. Now, he says he'll tell us after the election where the cuts might come from, but you can start to get a hint in terms of what they've voted against. And there's plenty they've voted against where you can see what are they likely to do next time, because last time he was in office, they had low wages growth as a deliberate design feature of their management of the Australian economy. And so every measure that we have put forward to get wages moving, they have opposed. The minimum wage has gone up nearly $150 a week in this term of government. Guess how long it took them to reach the same figure? Their entire term of government. Their entire wasted decade it took them to get to the level that we have had the increase in one term. You meet people working in supermarkets now being paid $11.56 more an hour. You meet meat workers and being paid the extra because there's bargaining laws that they oppose. You'll meet meat workers in Queensland. Pay rises have been up to 42% because of same job, same pay, which they voted against, and if they get the chance, those wages will be cut. Coal miners in New South Wales, pay rises where they were being underpaid, now fixed because of same job, same pay, between $15,000 and $35,000 a year. Pay rises which they say they voted against and they say they would get rid of if they had the chance. Now, as I meet these workers around the country, they want their pay rises. They wanted their tax cut. I'm yet to meet one who says, can you please make sure I can pay for the boss's lunch? It's not something that's being demanded. It's something none of them want that, but they know that this Leader of the Opposition would freeze wages. He would cut wages. He'd spend billions of dollars on long lunches for the boss, and they know that under him they'd be worse off.
Call to the Shadow Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under this bad Labor government, Australians' living standards have collapsed by 8.7%. This is the biggest collapse on record and bigger than any other peer economy. Will the Prime Minister now apologise for promising Australians they would be better off and admit that Australians can't afford another 3 years of Labor?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you. I'm asked about the impact of policy on people's living standards. And I make this point, that if the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Treasurer had his way, Australian families would be $7,200 worse off than they are today.
Order.
We inherited.
Order. The members on my left will just cease interjecting.
I'll explain it for the Shadow Treasurer. See, under you, when inflation's going up but wages are going down, people are worse off. Now inflation's going down and wages are going up. That's what lifts people up, and that is what we are achieving. We understand that we inherited a system where inflation had a 6 in front of it. We know that people were really struggling. Interest rates started to go up under them. And we know that global inflation has had an impact as well due to a range of measures, including the long tail of COVID. That is why we have taken action. That is why we produced a tax cut for every taxpayer. And without our tax cuts, 84% of taxpayers would have been worse off. Under their system that they maintained support for and they said they would go back to, 84% of taxpayers would have been worse off, and 2.9 million taxpayers wouldn't have seen a cent. Without our cheaper medicines that they opposed, Australians would have been $1 billion worse off, and the most vulnerable Australians are amongst them. Without our Medicare urgent care clinics, 1.1 million Australians wouldn't have got a free doctor's appointment. And we know why they opposed it, because the Leader of the Opposition, when he was Health Minister, said that there were too many free health appointments. Medicare was bad because it was free, which is why he tried to introduce a GP tax, just as the Deputy Leader of the Opposition has said that free TAFE is not valued because it's free, because you don't value it unless you pay for it. If it wasn't for us, 5.8 million extra bulk billed appointments wouldn't have happened. And importantly, to follow up on the former minister and his hard work on IR, 2.6 million award wage workers would be worse off. Would be worse off. They opposed. Remember, during the last campaign, that $1 an hour increase was going to destroy the entire economy. We said we absolutely would support it, as we have not once, not twice, but 3 times with consecutive minimum wage increases.
Call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government providing cost of living relief for early childhood education? Is there anything that could put this at risk and see families worse off?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education, the Minister for Youth and the Minister assisting the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Spence for his question, because the member for Spence understands that investing in early childhood education helps workers and it helps families. We're building the foundations for a future where every single Australian child and every single Australian family can have access to good quality early education. Mr Speaker, we came into government in 2022 with a commitment to make early childhood education and care more affordable through our cheaper childcare reforms. We quickly turned that commitment into progress, with more than 1 million families benefiting from those reforms. For an Australian family earning $120,000 a year, accessing 30 hours of early learning a week, they've saved around $2,766 since September 2023. And, Mr Speaker, out-of-pocket expenses are still lower. They're lower today than what they were before our cheaper childcare reforms. That's real cost of living relief. But, of course, we know that there's more to do. And that's why we're continuing to put downward pressure on fees through our fee caps, 4.4% in the first year, 4.2% in the second year, as part of our worker retention payment. Our government has delivered a 15% pay rise for up to 200,000 early childhood education workers right across Australia, because we know that a strong and sustainable workforce is fundamental, absolutely fundamental, to a universal early learning system. That's why we've invested in it. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to say that in the short time since we've introduced that wage increase, more than 50% of services have now applied for that wage increase. And that's made a significant difference to the lives of so many early childhood workers, but also to the sector more broadly. New data just in shows that workforce vacancy rates in the early childhood sector have plummeted over the last 12 months by 22% since December 2023. Now, Mr Speaker, I'm asked about risks, and the fact is that the Leader of the Opposition has confirmed that they will make huge cuts, but that Australians will be left in the dark as to what those cuts are until after the election. But there might be some clues into what they might be cutting in the fact that they opposed every single cost of living measure that we put forward. So we don't know what the risk is going to be, but we do know this. We do know that while this Albanese Labor government wants to see children accessing the transformational benefits of early learning, wants to see families accessing the essential services they need so that they can work or study, the Leader of the Opposition wants to see bosses getting free lunches on the taxpayer dollar.
The call to the honourable member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Between June 2022 and June 2024, the Australian population increased by 1.19 million, 4.4%. Over that time, Commonwealth-supported places for medicine have effectively stayed the same. With 1 in 3 GPs set to retire, the AMA has forecast a shortfall of 10,000 GPs in Australia. Will you urgently lift the number of Commonwealth-supported places to study medicine to help address the doctor shortage in Australia?
Hear, hear. Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for her question. As she would know, in budget 2 years ago we allocated an extra places for medical studies at university. That's something we did in consultation with the Minister for Health. That's something that's always under consideration by this government. As I've said in this chamber many times, I want more people to get a crack at going to university or go to TAFE. That's why we're making the changes that we are, whether it's making TAFE free, which the opposition are opposed to, or whether it's cutting the cost of university by cutting student debt by 20%. And in December we released the mid-year economic update, where we allocated additional funding to university to help more young people get a crack at going to university, including, and I know this is important to the member because she's contacted me on a number of occasions about young people being able to study far away from capital cities. The announcement we made yesterday around a university study hub at Kangaroo Island is a classic example of that. Extra funding to help children from poor backgrounds and from regional Australia to get the support they need, not just to start a university degree, but to finish it. Real demand-driven, needs-based funding to help more students not just start a degree, but finish it, so that we get the doctors that we need, the teachers that we need, the nurses that we need, the psychologists that we need, the social workers that we need, all of the skilled workforce that we need to build Australia's future.
Order. Call to the honourable member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. Minister, how does the Albanese Labor government's investments help aged care workers earn more and keep more of what they earn? But how does this compare, Minister, to other approaches which would leave people worse off?
Call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for Lingiari for her question and for her efforts to lift the standard of aged care in this country. Mr Speaker, before the last election, we promised more nurses who would be better paid in order to better care for those who need it most in this country. And we said, if elected, a Labor government would put our money where our mouth is. And we've done exactly that. $15 billion for increases to aged care workers' pay. And underneath the Albanese government, registered nurses are now taking home an additional $196 a week, or more than $10,000 a year. And personal care workers are now taking home an additional $141 a week, or $7,300 a year. And Rachel, who's a Northside home care worker who came to visit me at my mobile office in Zilmere, told me that that is having a transformative impact on workers like herself. And after 10 years, or almost 10 years, of low and stagnant wages, the car park of her workplace looked terrible. People had basically unroadworthy cars. No one could afford to fix them. But with pay raises like this, people have been able to get their cars fixed or even get more reliable cars. And that is a good thing. Mr Speaker, though, I was asked how the government's support for aged care workers compares with other approaches that would leave people worse off. And I can tell the member for Lingiari that the Coalition have never supported a pay rise for people like Rachel. And in 2019, when the now Prime Minister stood with aged care workers to back their pay rise, the Coalition railed that a $1 an hour increase would destroy the economy. And when we proposed to deliver Labor's tax cut for aged care workers, the Coalition's impulse was to call for a snap election over it. And when we decided to expand fee-free TAFE so that aged care workers could upskill without digging into their household budget, the Coalition called that wasteful spending. So if pay rises and tax cuts and affordable higher education all aren't the Coalition's priorities, Mr Speaker, I, and frankly the people I represent, have been wondering what is, and I've been keeping an ear out. So imagine my surprise when recently I heard the opposition make a billion-dollar promise using the exact same words. They would put their money where their mouth is. And, Mr Speaker, we know where that money and where those mouths are going to end up. At a waterfront restaurant at about 11:59 a.m. on a Friday, a $10 billion plan for some sparkling mineral water and a medium rare steak and some heretofore unspecified entertainment. Mr Speaker, when we say we're putting our money where our mouth is, we mean we are delivering on a $15 billion pay rise promise for aged care workers to improve their lives and those they care for. When they say they're putting their money where their mouth is, they mean a $10 billion plan for you to shout the boss's lunch.
Call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On what date was the Prime Minister first advised of the planned mass casualty terror attack against Sydney's Jewish community?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. It goes to national security issues. And on national security, there are two priorities. The first priority is, of course, keeping the public safe. The second and related principle is that we engage with the Australian Federal Police and the National Intelligence Agencies. We don't go out there and brief about National Security Committee meetings. We don't discuss those details because it's an ongoing investigation.
Order.
And what you do when you have an ongoing investigation is that you take the advice of the Australian Federal Police and the ASIO Director-General. And that is precisely what I have done the whole way through. Now, the Leader of the Opposition is always made available briefings when they're requested. He has not requested a briefing at this time. He has had, he said on Sunday, that he'd had text messages with the ASIO Director-General. When asked by David Spears what was in those text messages, he quite rightly refused to say, because that's how you deal with these things. This isn't some game.
Order.
This isn't some game, and it should not be about politics. And quite frankly, it is astonishing. It is astonishing.
Order. The manager on a point of order.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. On relevance, we've asked for the date, not the detail, the date. And Premier Minns made the date clear, so I'm sure the Prime Minister is not accusing Premier Minns of having done anything improper.
The Prime Minister is being clear about the question he was asked, in particular giving reasons perhaps why he's not releasing that date. So he is being directly relevant, and it's up to him whether he chooses to release a date or he talks about the question and why that is the case. The Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, Mr Speaker, there are some people who in the past have understood why these issues are important, that we back up our national security agencies rather than seek to undermine them. And one of those was indeed quoted in February 2022 when the former government was in place. The Chair of Parliament's Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, the Liberal Senator James Paterson, has rebuked the Defence Minister Peter Dutton for referencing classified information during last week's hyper-partisan brawling over national security. Of course, that was when the Leader of the Opposition was claiming both open source and other intelligence IC confirmed that Labor was somehow, according to him, Beijing's pick at the 2022 election. That, of course, was before he became pro-China just last week.
Call to the honourable member for Aston.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How has the Albanese Labor government made training—
Order. Order. The same rules apply across the chamber. We're just going to ask the member for Aston to begin her question again, and she'll be heard in silence. The member for Aston has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. How has the Albanese Labor government made training more affordable so Australians get the skills they need for the jobs they want? Are there any proposals for TAFE and skills for Australians that would leave them worse off?
Give a call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank my friend, the member for Aston, for her question. A proud graduate of Box Hill TAFE and a proud supporter of free TAFE. She knows that the Albanese government has delivered free TAFE to almost 600,000 Australians, and that by removing financial barriers, free TAFE is helping Australians to gain skills they need and to build Australia's future. Now, the free TAFE Senate inquiry has now received dozens of submissions highlighting the positive impact of free TAFE. The Australian Nurses and Midwives Federation highlighted the case of Christy Armour, a proud Gamilaroi woman who's completed the Diploma of Nursing. And she says this: the fee-free funding has been amazing, and the money I've saved will go towards paying for my Bachelor of Nursing. Plus, studying for my diploma with TAFE Queensland means I'll knock a year off my bachelor studies. What a great story. And TAFE Directors Australia shared the story of Estelle Wiley, who's just completed a Certificate 3 in Individual Support at TAFE. And she says this: if it wasn't for fee-free TAFE, I wouldn't have been able to do the course in the first place, as I wasn't in a position to pay for training at the time. She goes on, it's pretty much set me up with a career. Again, a great story that members' officers should be listening to. And they should also think about how much students are saving. In Victoria, a student doing a diploma of nursing—
Just going to stop it with the unparliamentary remarks and mean comments. It's just unbecoming. Minister will be heard.
Thank you, Speaker. Let's think a bit more about Estelle and Christy and all of the people like them, 600,000 people who could be saving more than $17,700 doing a Diploma of Nursing in Victoria, or $5,200 doing a Cert 3 in Agriculture in Queensland. Real savings for people getting skills we need. Now, free tape is making a difference, and that is why we are going to make it permanent. But the Liberals call it wasteful spending. The Leader of the Opposition here says he's going to cut wasteful spending, and we know that he will cut free tape and make you worse off. The Shadow Assistant Minister for Education has let the cat out of the bag at the Senate inquiry when he asks, would the South Australian government continue to fund free tape if the Commonwealth were to reduce its funding? And of course this is no wonder, because the Deputy Leader of the Opposition has said that, and I quote, "It is a key principle and tenet of the Liberal Party that if you don't pay for something, you don't value it." And it's not just free tape the Liberal Party don't value. It's public education writ large, it's Medicare, it's the NDIS, it's public hospitals. Australians will be worse off under the Liberal Party and the Leader of the Opposition, who will cut free tape but spend billions of dollars on long lunches for bosses. And that means there is a very clear choice at this election. The Liberals will cut free tape and make Australians worse off, whereas under the Albanese government, free tape is here to stay.
Call to the member for Warringah.
To the Prime Minister, you spoke earlier of the Queensland floods. We're seeing yet again the impacts and escalating risks of climate crisis. Over in the US, the Californian wildfires the damage will exceed $135 billion. Clearly, we cannot ensure our way out of the climate crisis. Action on preparation and resilience must occur now. Will the government commit to a round table to bring together construction, insurance, banking, local government, civil society to ensure better investment in climate resilience and adaptation?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Warringah for her question and for her genuine commitment to action on climate change. And the member should be pleased to know that we're doing precisely along the lines in which she asked in her question. We're developing both the National Adaptation Plan as well as National Risk Assessment as we speak. We know that the impact of climate change is meaning, whilst Australia has always had natural disasters, if you look over a period of time, they are more intense and they are more frequent, and that is occurring as we speak. We have made sure as well that we're addressing the issue of insurance availability. So we've established, for example, in one of the election commitments that we had was to establish a $200 million a year, every year, in disaster prevention and resilient projects through the Disaster Ready Fund. So that's doing things such as raising levies around Mackay. That's making sure that the cost of building bridges, for example, the discussion I spoke about earlier today, building back better so that you don't have the same bridges washed away every time there's a flood, like used to happen with the Iron-Sea River Bridge up in the Gulf country, where every time that occurred and then food and medical supplies had to be chopped into Normanton and Corumba into those communities. When I spoke to Bob Catter just this week, some of those communities in Far North Queensland are cut off as we speak at the moment. So we do need to invest in those measures. We also need to invest in projects that help reduce the risk of damage to homes and businesses that will put that downward pressure on insurance premiums. When I was in Darwin on Christmas Day, one of the things that occurred with the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Cyclone Tracy, that tragedy, as Darwin was built back, it was built back to be more cyclone resilient, as opposed to what was there 50 years earlier, which just saw massive damage that could have been less had that not occurred. So we do need to invest. We also are working with insurance companies through, for example, the Hazards Insurance Partnership brings together the Australian government and the insurance sector, creating a forum so we can talk about how we can reduce those insurance premiums, because we know that it is having a real impact, and I thank the member for her ongoing interest in these very serious issues.
Call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government helping families to lower their energy bills, and what policies would make families worse off?
Order. Members on my left. Order. Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the question. And of course, the Albanese government is delivering $300 in bill relief to every single Australian household. Those opposite disparage it and they oppose it, but we know it makes a meaningful difference. But we know there's a lot more to do. And we know we need more energy in the system. And the House has heard me say before that over the decade of the coalition government, we saw 4 gigawatts of dispatchable power leave our grid, and that left us very exposed. And I can tell the House today, for the first time, Mr Speaker, in the first sitting day of 2025, I can tell the House that unlike the opposition, which saw 4 gigawatts leave the grid over their decade, over the last 3 years we have now seen 4 gigawatts of dispatchable energy enter the grid, Mr Speaker. Off under them, on under us. And that's in addition to 15 gigawatts of renewable energy as well, Mr Speaker. We know that we need more electricity for more reliability and for lower prices. Now, the member asked me what policies might see bills go up, and to be fair, the opposition's had some pretty big news as well, Mr Speaker. Just before Christmas, after a long wait, we finally saw their final nuclear policy. I wish I could tell the House it was worth the wait, but I'm afraid I have to tell the House it was an absolute Barry Crocker, Mr Speaker, of a costings document. First, in order to pretend that nuclear is cheaper, they had to assume a smaller economy. They actually said, we think the economy will be $4 trillion smaller by 2050. I mean, well done. Congratulations. I wish we'd thought of that. Less electricity costs less, Mr Speaker. That's their entire policy. If you produce 40% less electricity, maybe it's around 40% cheaper. I don't know how those geniuses came up with that, Mr Speaker. But then there are other problems. The Leader of the Opposition was out on his little interview on Sunday, which went so well, and he was asked about energy prices, and he said, well, the 44% reduction in the model delivering of an energy system, you would expect a 44% reduction or of that order being passed through in energy bill relief. So he says that's going to come off bills. Well, there's been some response to that. Dr Dylan McConnell said, and I quote in response, "That's a complete misunderstanding of the Coalition's own policy. He has no idea what he's talking about." Now, that's what the experts say, Mr Speaker. We know that their policy will cost $600 billion, which will have to be paid for. Paid for by bills, paid for by cuts to services as well. $600 billion in cuts to pay for nuclear, $600 billion that Australians will pay for. That's why, Mr Speaker, the Australian people can say that they will very clearly be worse off under Dutton.
Order. The Minister will refer to members by their correct title. The member for Fairfax has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and my question goes to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister provide a single example of an Australian family that has received a $275 cut to their power bill, as was promised before the last election nearly 100 times?
Order. Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Housing. The Minister for the Environment is warned. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I note that all Australian households, including that of the honourable member, got $300 as a direct result of our government's policy.
Order. Prime Minister's concluded his answer. No. The member for Fairfax. Order. The member for Fairfax can simply not rise and start yelling across the chamber. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Blair.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Why did the Albanese Labor government abolish the golden ticket visa? Is the minister aware of proposals that will undermine the integrity of our visa system?
Call to the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Blair for his question. When the member for Blair refers to the golden ticket visa, it's the name that's often given to the significant investor visa. This is a visa that was abolished by this government, and abolished for very good reason, because it was not consistent with the integrity of the visa system that Australians would expect. I had thought that was a bipartisan position because of the serious national security reasons that were associated with its abolition. But over the weekend, over recent days, we've seen that, once again, the Leader of the Opposition didn't realise there was a boom mic overhead. And when asked about this visa, he said, not realising he was being heard, "I think we'll bring it back." Whether we do it before the election, we'll have to consider all of that. Now, there has been a response from the founder of the Magnitsky Act, Sir Bill Browder. And if those opposite want to in some way discredit someone of that esteem, I suggest they first go to the homepage of Senator Patterson. You'll find both Sir Bill Browder being praised in the parliament, and you'll find his image on the homepage of Senator Patterson. But here's what he's had to say about this proposal, and these are all quotes. "Reopening the door to organised crime." I quote again, "The types of people who have taken advantage of this in the past are often the ones you least want to have coming to your country." I quote again.
Order.
I quote again in language which I would not use, but to quote, "Australia is not such a poor country that it needs to prostitute itself to Chinese and Russian criminals." I quote again, "It's hard to imagine that it's good politics to be standing in front of the Australian people and saying we want to have potentially dodgy criminals buying their way into Australian residency and Australian passports." And one further quote, "It seems like the kind of thing that someone might be doing just for a narrow group of political contributions." When it comes to immigration policy, I suggest the Australian people don't look at what he says, but look at what he does. He opposed limiting the number of students coming in. He issued more visas than any other minister in history, and now he is wanting as policy cash for visas.
Order. Prime Minister has the call. The minister's concluded his answer. I'll call the manager on a point of order. Yeah, just Prime Minister can. We'll get to the Prime Minister, but I'll hear from the manager first.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Speaker. That was a very clear reflection on members on two occasions from the Leader of the House, and I ask that you direct him to withdraw them.
What did he say?
No order. No, we'll handle this. The Leader of the House was quoting articles. Are you talking about the remarks after the? I didn't hear what specific comment. I don't want you to repeat it.
Mr. Speaker, practice is very clear. Just by quoting somebody else's words does not mean that the Leader does not have to retract any reflection on a member, and the reflection was very clear in what he said.
What's the reflection?
Look, I think if there's the manager is entitled to raise a point of order, as any member has. My consistent policy is if to assist the House to withdraw, but I'm unclear of what the reflection was. But order. But this is on the point of order.
The point of order. The point of everything that was quoted was a description of a policy that has been proposed, and it is completely within standing orders for strong words to be used about a policy, particularly a policy that would be against national security advice.
Order. The Attorney-General. Order. Yeah, we'll find a way through this. The manager On a point of order.
Now, Mr Speaker, it's very clear that the leader included a statement in the form of a quote that impugns members on this side of the House, particularly the Leader of the Opposition, and you cannot mask that under the quotes of an external party. That's very clear in practice, and I would just suggest that if the House resolves that that's not required to be withdrawn, that will be a precedent that the opposition will assume is precedent.
Yeah. Well, this is. You know, I'm going to I'm going to defer to the manager. I'm just going to get the leader to withdraw, but I'm not sure what he's withdrawing because it's a quote. So,
just to the point of order, if I may, just to assist. If I had read quotes that named the Leader of the Opposition and reflected on him, then no. If I had read quotes that named any member of this House and in that reflected directly on that person in that way, then you can't use a quote to hide behind that. I get that. Practice is quite clear. Every quotation that I have used is a reflection on the policy, a reflection on the policy that the Leader of the Opposition has advanced.
Yeah. Order. Order. Members on my right, we're going to hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, if it helps you, and again we're not with the proof of Hansard, but there was a statement that was made, not a quote, a statement that was made by the minister at the end of the quotations, which did impugn character, which was offensive, and I asked him to withdraw it.
Look, to assist the House and the Leader of the House.
The term cash-for visas is how the significant investor visa works. You get the visa on the basis you are bringing millions of dollars. That's how it works.
Order. Yeah. Just the Leader of the Opposition, when I'm making deliberations, doesn't need to give me his full view of everything. He's done it a couple of times today, and I'm not happy about it. So I'm just going to get the Leader of the House to withdraw to help the House, to assist the House. But this will have an impact going forward when other quotes are used during question time.
To assist the House, I'll withdraw.
Thank you. Order. Order. Prime Minister has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I wish to add to an answer. Mr Speaker, I was asked a question by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition about the food prices and the figures, the latest figures, year to year to the December quarter.
Order. Members on my left. No. Order. No. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition and the Leader of the Opposition is completely disrespectful. The Prime Minister is entitled to add to the answer. We're all going to hear him in silence. Prime Minister has the call.
Year to year, food and non-alcohol beverages, the latest figures are the inflation rate is 3.0. In their last year in office, it was 5.9.
Order. Before I call the member for Groom, I will hear the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, a personal explanation with respect to that abuse.
Do you claim to be misrepresented?
I do, by the Prime Minister just now. That was an abusive process.
The Deputy Leader may proceed.
Mr Speaker, I submit that that was an abusive process by the Prime Minister. In seeking to add to an answer, he needs to refer to the question. He did not refer to the question, and his purported adding to an answer was not relevant to the question.
That's not a personal misrepresentation. That's just getting up and saying something in the chamber, and we can't have that. Question time is not a place where you don't like something. There's standing orders for a reason. So it's a point of order. It's not a personal explanation. Now we'll go to the member for Groom who has sought the call.
Mr Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 105B, I wish to draw your attention to multiple overdue questions in writing, questions 753, 754, 755 and 765. Speaker, can I ask that you write to the Minister for Infrastructure and seek your explanation as to why they chose not to answer my questions in writing within 60 days?
I shall write to the Minister as the Standing Order provides. Pursuant to Section 65 of the Parliamentary Service Act 1999, I present the annual report of the Parliamentary Budget Office for 2023 to 2024. I also present the Auditor-General's Audit Reports number 15 to 21 for 2024 to 2025. Details of the reports will be recorded in the votes and proceedings. The Leader of the House with papers.
Mr Speaker, these documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to the honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.